Hello, it's Miss Beth, and I am so excited to share today's episode with you. First, I need to tell you two quick Number one, we have an upcoming blending workshop. This is the workshop for any parent or teacher who's ever been tempted to say, just sound it out. I'm going to tell you why I don't use that phrase, what I do instead, and all the things that you need to keep in mind when your child is at that beginning to blend and decode stage. So this is typically for older preschool parents, kindergarten, or first grade. Also, teachers are totally invited to take this workshop. We're going to talk about open and closed syllables, blending and decoding bigger words, compound words, so much good stuff. This comes as a part 2 from our ABC workshop, which was last week, but you don't have to have taken that workshop to learn in this workshop. So make sure that you're on my email list or following on Instagram. That's where I'll share it, but email's probably better because Instagram is unpredictable. Then after that, we're having a sight word workshop. So stay tuned for that. You're going to learn all about orthographic mapping, the right way to teach sight words to help your child be a successful reader for much more than just kindergarten or first grade, and why we got in this inaccurate pattern with memorizing words. So I'll teach you all about that in the sight word workshop. So those are two things coming up. Stay tuned for that. Now today's episode is all about dyslexia. So I'm having my friend Cher on, who is a dyslexia specialist, and we both have the same training, which you'll hear, spoiler alert, is the gold standard for helping dyslexic kids learn how to read, and that's Orton, Gillingham. We're going to talk about the very first signs of dyslexia, if you can tell in your baby or toddler. Is it genetic? Can you outgrow dyslexia? What to do about advocating for your child, how to advocate for your child, how to know when you need to be the one pushing for the assessment, all the fun parts of this journey. It's a big conversation, but it's still fun and lighthearted, and I hope that it's not too overwhelming. If you have any questions after this episode or any episode, please feel free to reach out. I am here for you. I'm cheering for you. I hope that you learn a lot and feel empowered.
Dyslexia is a difference in the way the brain processes the sounds of language, not just sound. So your ears work fine, but your brain doesn't process the sounds of language typically. So one of the very first signs that parents often see is a speech delay. I mean, if your child has a speech delay, they're dyslexic, and not every dyslexic child has a speech delay. But it's not at all uncommon for the very first thing in retrospect to have been a speech delay. And the other thing that you really think about is that dyslexia is very strongly hereditary. So if mom or dad or siblings have dyslexia, or a lot of times grandpa just didn't finish school, we don't know what it was, but if there's a history of difficulty in the family with reading, then you want to think about dyslexia if your child starts to have trouble. But really, the very first thing we often see is a speech delay.
Yeah.
Another one, my daughter, many kids do this. You know how kids have their like baby talk words? Like my daughter's ferator.
Spaghetti. Oh, for reader?
Ferator instead of refrigerator. So when there's extended baby talk like that, that can also be an early sign for that same reason, that it's about how your brain is processing the sounds of language. So sometimes that's another thing that we see really early. Not always, because dyslexia goes from mild, moderate, all the way to profound, and not every child will have every sign.
Like most things, there's a spectrum. And this is good that this episode is coming after I had a speech therapist, Stephanie Cohen, on, and I think that episode is like 2 episodes ago, and she talks about when certain sounds should develop. So like that not every sounds come at the same time. So R isn't something that 2-year-olds can usually say. So that's not a sign of dyslexia if your 2-year-old says like queen instead of green.
Exactly. So it's more of a delay in any speech at all sometimes,
Mm,
right?
mm-hmm.
But that's one of the early signs. Another thing that we see a lot in our preschoolers is I know that you talk about like the high value letters, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
letters in your name, they're
Yeah.
magic for kids. M for mom, right? Often the preschoolers who are dyslexic don't even, they can't learn those letters, like letters that they're highly motivated to learn or that most children would be highly motivated. They're just, they don't click. It doesn't happen for them in the same way.
Yeah. Okay, I want to back up for a second
Yeah.
because I how did
They
you
would
get involved?
leave me, most of them. I would feel like they were on their way because they had some words, right? And they usually knew most of the letter sounds. And the ones who didn't usually ended up getting referred into special education and then they would learn to read. And I remember asking that teacher, what do you do? And he said, I teach them phonics. I was like, oh. And the other
Wow.
thing that happened is besides those kids who were really struggling, I found like the third and fourth grade teachers would say about me in the first grade cohort, I don't know what you guys were doing, but these kids can't read. And we would
Mm.
say, well, they were reading when they left us. Like, obviously, you're the problem. And now I've realized like kids can memorize a couple thousand words. And then they hit this wall, third or fourth grade. So you have this child that you thought was reading, they can't read.
You have fake readers.
You have fake readers. So I started to see that. And then when I was living in Hawaii, I was exposed to Orton Gillingham training for the first time.
And what year was that?
That was 2011.
Okay.
I've been teaching more than 20 years at that point.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like putting it together and, and
What
yes,
did you feel like sorry, I like I wonder what people because I remember what it felt like to be like, "Oh my God, I what? How did I not learn this?" Like, did you have that realization? Were you like mad
yeah,
or were you just like, "What the
I
heck?"
I felt like someone had kicked me in the chest because first I just thought, well, it was just that group of kids, right? And they went to special education and they got help. But then I started to realize like, no, it was also those kids whose third and fourth grade teachers said these kids can't read. So I loved my kids and they loved me and they loved coming to school and they learned a lot of things. And so plenty of them did learn to read because some kids don't need as much direct instruction. But yeah, it was like questioning my whole identity, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I didn't get full Orton Gillingham training for a while longer. After I came back from Hawaii, I worked for a homeschool charter school. And so I was coaching parents. And the special education teacher there was very, very well versed in Orton Gillingham and different phonics programs. And so I learned a lot from her. And it was a great time to learn it because I was working more intensely with smaller groups of children and families and following them for years. So I could really see that when these parents did this program in first grade, yes, their child was reading in fourth grade, and that made a huge difference. So I had the opportunity to go Orton Gillingham training through the Dyslexia Training Institute. And yeah, that changed everything. Changed
Yeah.
everything. So yeah, I feel like I have some penance to do. I have some things to make up for. But
Yeah.
you just do the best you can based on what you know, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a whole other thing. It's like, yeah, we do the best we can based on what we know, but how come this isn't being taught to people going to school to be teachers?
Still, it's
How,
really a tragedy.
why do
Yeah,
you think it isn't yet?
that's like the $10,000 question. I think that, first of all, you have a lot of teachers in the primary grades like me, and you do see progress with most of your kids because most of us do teach phonics to some degree, right? So you do see maybe half of your kids are really making great progress that sticks because they are in the continuum where they don't need every single phonics pattern taught to them. They can start to see patterns on their own. So it's very hard to help those people understand. No, really, those children that you loved, they're still not getting it. So those are the people that end up being adjunct professors, right? Who wants to be in charge of telling other teachers how to teach reading? Teachers who love it. And the problem is, a lot of those teachers are still wrong. And then, of course, there's money involved. I think that as we're starting to get more materials that are developed that support what we know to be the current science of reading, more of those will get adopted. But let's face it, like the guided reading empire, Countess and Pinnell, they've been just controlling the market for so long. And teachers are well-meaning. They don't want to believe that what they're doing is wrong, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's as simple as that. And luckily, there are more and more researchers out there who have a platform, more and more teachers and former teachers who have a platform. And now we've got social media, right? Which we didn't have when I was teaching. So there was no way to get out of your bubble. Now there's a way. But it's really on teachers to take on the responsibility of saying, I need to really pay attention to this research. This isn't just another chapter of the reading wars, and I am responsible for these kids and their future. And I have to be willing to listen to people who have a differing opinion. Because I think when people really open their minds and are willing to look at what's being presented, it's pretty clear. It's not, yes, things change, right? Like what we believe about the science of reading today will be different to some degree in 10 years. But you've got to be open and know which parts are like fundamental and which parts we're still playing with.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You know what? That's so funny. I was literally reading a book today, like a business book, but it's quote in it that said, all drama in leadership and life comes from the need to be right, to being closed-minded and not curious. So I think I just solve everything if we're curious. So like, of course, nobody wants to be told you're not doing a good enough job. So maybe it like that curiosity of like, okay, wait, if I listen to what someone else is saying and presenting that information in a way that's like, not like, no, this is the right way, even though we know it is the right way, to just be like, I know you were taught this way because I was too. Could you be 5% curious about this research and take a look at it?
Yeah. Yeah. I hope it's going to happen. I mean, I've like been through things for enough decades to be concerned and cynical, but I really hope that we're on the cusp of major change because there are states and districts that are changing. It's hopeful. It's hopeful.
It is hopeful. I'm so excited. I hope. Yeah, but I saw something in Illinois that said they're hoping to pass something in 2026 that teachers would have to retest every year to keep their teaching license about the science of reading. I'll have to find that and link it.
Yeah.
But I think like there was a lot of pushback about it, which I understand, but I mean, you can't do anything if you can't read.
Exactly. Exactly. You can't do anything if you can't read. And that's why like it's the thing that matters in teaching and education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about some of the early signs of dyslexia. Like, I think it's not what people necessarily think. So people think, oh no, my child is reversing letters, which sure, later that is one of the signs, but we're talking more in like the preschool years, things like difficulty learning nursery rhymes, or difficulty. You said switching up words like flutterby instead of butterfly,
Mhm.
forgetting names. Can you
Right.
talk more about that? Or some other signs that you've seen or you
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
people overlook?
We see forgetting names, and as we said, like mixing up syllables in words or having baby talk. We also see sometimes word retrieval, like kids will say volcano instead of tornado.
Mm,
They're kind of broadly in the same category of disasters, and they're both three syllables, right? But it's not the word they want. So sometimes we see those kinds of confusions. Um, Following multi-step directions can be more difficult for young dyslexic kids.
yes. And you know what? I actually was just giving a presentation about this at a preschool workshop, but that makes so much sense because following multi-step directions is demonstrating that they can hear and process
Right.
sounds in their environment. So that is,
Exactly.
if they can't do that, okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, exactly. It's one thing I remember I would notice in when I was teaching transitional kindergarten is, you get into your routine and you'll say, okay, everybody, we're getting ready to go home. So let's grab your jacket and grab your backpack and come line up at the door. And there would be kids who spoke English perfectly, but you'd see them stop and kind of go, grab my backpack,
mm,
grab my jacket. So there are kids that have trouble following multi-step directions. That's something that I think is really interesting. And like you said, maybe they just need more processing time, or
mhm.
maybe they're really just not connecting all of it. And it's more challenging for them to really get what you're saying. And what you
Yeah,
said about rhyme is so important. Um, and it's something that usually just comes naturally to kids, right? You sing Jack and Jill went up the, and they know it pretty quickly automatically. So when you have a child that just does not get rhyme, that's like one of the basic parts of phonological and phonemic awareness, right? Is being aware of sounds in words and knowing that rhyming is just changing one sound in a word. That's one of the very basic skills that is the foundation for reading. So if a child can't rhyme, it's concerning.
at what age do you think that it's concerning that they can't rhyme?
I it's well, it's hard to say because of course it depends on how much oral language they have.
Exactly, yeah.
But let's assume they're in a nice language rich environment, right? And that they sit still and listen to you read books and sing songs. Then I start to be concerned at the beginning of kindergarten. If someone's been introduced to that, I'll kind of wonder and keep my eye on it. But I do want to say that if your child can't rhyme, go ahead and teach them other skills, right? So I don't want people to think, oh, my child can't rhyme, so I'm not going to work on breaking words into sounds yet, right?
Right.
Because we know that even though rhyming is an indicator for difficulty with reading, you can learn to read without ever learning to rhyme.
Right.
So it's like it's a warning sign, but not a prerequisite skill. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because I've started to have parents talk to me and say, well, I'm not playing those games that you talked about where we play with compound words and go rainbow, because they can't rhyme yet. I'm like, don't do that.
Yeah, yeah,
Keep
yeah.
going with
What?
everything else.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's
Yeah.
actually a good jumping Start,
Like,
point.
because
Where do you like to start? Rhyming, syllables, phonemic awareness games. Where do you like to start?
well, I mean, backing up even more, it all just starts with oral language, right? It starts with talking, 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 listening to stories. But then I do things simultaneously. I start teaching the alphabet at the same time that I'm focusing on rhyme and blending and segmenting because we know some kids will be stronger with one than the other. We don't know which kid is which. So we really
Mhm.
want to expose everybody to all of those things. So I will start with like compound word games. I know Like, I'm sure you do the game where it's like, oh, what are we going to have for breakfast? Let's have eggs or something like
Mhm.
that. But I do that at the same time as I'm starting to teach what I think will be the high value letters for that child. So the letters in their name, probably, or M for mom, D for dad, CH for Charlie, right?
Mhm.
So I don't think there is something that you have to choose to be first. I think you want to kind of jump in and start doing all of it when they're little.
Yes, that's well, as you probably know, we do baby classes and toddler
Yes.
classes, and that's exactly why, because I always tell parents like do all of it and kind of like especially with toddlers, see what they're interested in and then give them more of
Yeah.
that so they start to feel confident.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Because it flows over from one thing to the next. So yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, it's kind of a vague answer.
No, I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so somebody asked, how early can dyslexia be identified?
It is possible for dyslexia to be identified in kindergarten. That would usually be a more severely dyslexic kid. Um, you would probably have to pay for that
Mm.
assessment. You're unlikely to be able to get your school to do that, but it is absolutely possible to identify some children with dyslexia in kindergarten. I think that it's worth really thinking about the kind of teaching they've had.
Mm,
I don't want anyone to just say, wow, my kindergartner is coming home from school and they're not really knowing too many letters. Like, you really want to know what they've been taught, right?
hmm.
Because there's the word is dyslexia. It's
I
not
know.
dyslexia. It's not a problem with them hearing the sounds of language. It's dyslexia, which is the problem with no one having taught them correctly, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah.
Did
Like,
you make this
so,
word up?
no. So you cannot assume that your first grader is dyslexic or has a learning disability if you then find out that they've just been doing the kind of guided reading books where they've been taught to guess based on the picture or context, right?
Yeah. Gosh, it's
So,
so triggering.
so before you think I need my child assessed, you need to think first, has my child been taught?
Mm,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
good. That is
Yeah.
so good. That is such a good reminder.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so along those same lines, here was another question. Is it something that can be cured or rewired once or once you're dyslexic? Are you always dyslexic? I love that question.
Once you're dyslexic, you are always dyslexic. However, the kind of teaching that we do for kids that are dyslexic and really should do for everybody, which is just really systematic, like following a plan, introducing sounds in an order that makes sense with lots of review, actually rewires the brain of the dyslexic child.
Oh,
It
wow.
rewires everybody's brain, because I know you know that we're not wired to read in the same way we are to talk.
Mhm.
So everybody's brain, when they learn to read, the brain kind of hijacks areas that were intended for something else and turns them into areas that help you read. That same thing happens with dyslexic kids, but it requires more careful teaching over a longer period of time with more repetitions. They're still dyslexic, they're still themselves, but the reading circuit in their brain will be rewired to be like that of a typical reader with intervention.
I love it. And I just was talking with someone today and she said, oh, my daughter got diagnosed with dyslexia. And I said, oh, great. That is not a bad thing. That is good. One, to have a diagnosis, and
Yes.
two, like that kids with dyslexia, like you then they're often going to be in a better spot because you know exactly what kind of intervention. And many kids need that type of intervention and aren't getting it. So I said, make sure, because she's like, well, apparently there's a dyslexia program at this school, so I don't know if we should go there. And I said, go to any school on a tour and ask like if the reading interventionist is Orton Gillingham trained, because that's what a dyslexic child needs.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Orton Gillingham has been the gold standard for a long time. Another thing that's really interesting that we're finding out works really well, especially when you have a child who's a little bit older when they're diagnosed, is morphology instruction.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a student right now, I think she's probably fourth grade age. She's super smart and she has a lot of difficulty in reading. So while we are backfilling her phonics gaps, we are also teaching her root words. So we've talked about checked means to throw, and fort means strong. And she's learned to recognize those chunks, and then we talk about the prefixes, uncomfort, we're talking about fort, right? Uncomfortable or distract. So since she can read those chunks, it's giving her a jump ahead to be able to read some more complex words and give her more access to more books and more science and social studies concepts. So we're finding out that the morphology piece is super important for kids as well as Orton Gillingham. So
Yeah.
you really, really want your Orton Gillingham trained person to also be working on suffixes and prefixes, and they're not in necessarily in the traditional Orton Gillingham sequence, but the research
Oh,
is strong on this.
so
So
I, yeah, I got the morphology training. It must have been from Institute of Multisensory Education. I
mhm.
didn't realize it isn't in the original Orton Gillingham,
Yeah,
which is a good reminder for
yeah,
teachers.
it's so important because people often think that Orton Gillingham and the whole structured literacy is just about phonics.
No, oh yeah, this is what I always say. Anybody that is saying it's this and not this, they are so wrong. Like when people are like, no, well, kids need comprehension. It's like, yes, everyone that is advocating for science of reading also wants kids to have comprehension skills.
Exactly. Exactly.
Uh, I also like talking about words like word study, like, so I feel like working with dyslexic kids, they really respond to just like being straight up, being like, I know this seems ridiculous, I'm going to tell you exactly why this is spelled this way. Like the word healthy, which comes from the word heal, that's why it's spelled
Right.
that way and spelled differently. I think that like turns something on in the brain that's like, oh, I'm not just like crazy and just have to memorize these words that don't make sense. It actually has a reason.
Yeah, because our brains are made for seeking patterns, right? And so anything that you can have a child hold on to as an explanation is so helpful. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay. When would you say someone should worry? Oh, I'm kind of worried. Personally, I'm worried about this question. I'm reading it. When would you say to worry about letter reversals? My school isn't worried about my 8-year-old reversing letters, but I am.
Letter reversals all by themselves can be okay through second grade, but we want to see if it's part of an overwhelming pattern of other signs of dyslexia. So if your child is reading, but they still have reversals, I don't worry about it very much.
Mm,
If your child, it just like if your child is reading, but they can't rhyme, right? Like, don't care, it's okay.
right.
um, at some point you do want to kind of draw attention to them. But if your
Mhm.
child is reading, then I don't worry about it. If they also are substituting of for from, right? If they are also leaving off parts of the word, like the word is dragons and they say dragon, right? Or they say beauty instead of beautiful, or they're
Mm.
super slow at reading, or they hate to read. If you're seeing a pattern of things and reversals are a piece of that, then you're right to be concerned. But reversals by themselves, it's hard for us to accept that because of that myth is so persistent that dyslexia is saying letters backwards.
Where did that come from? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know. But no, that's not it.
You know what? Whoever, like, wherever that myth came from, the publicist of that myth needs to be the publicist of the science of reading so we could actually
Yeah,
get change
kidding.
happening.
I think People don't always understand where reversals come from, right? Because when you're a baby, you see your mama's face, and it doesn't matter which way she turns her head, it's still mama's face, right?
Right.
Like Cher,
Yeah.
you pick it up and spin it around, it's still a chair. But all of a
Yeah.
sudden, we have this lowercase b, and if you turn it, it's got a brand new name.
Yeah.
And our brains have never done that before. So
Yeah.
it takes time to get used to that, to get over that. I think they call it mirror invariance, right? So it's really normal, even to write complete sentences backwards for young children.
Yeah. When would you say that you want to see kids stop writing complete sentences backwards?
First grade,
Yeah, that's what
I
I
would
usually say
say.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
first
it's
grade.
so hard. People want like a hard and fast rule of timing, and it's so different, especially kindergarten and first grade. Kids, those 6 months, like maybe someone's five, someone's 5.5, that's basically like 2 years apart. There's so
Exactly.
much happening in those
Yeah.
those few months. So it's really hard to say specifically, but I
Yeah.
love, I love, I love your answer. That's just looking, that might be one thing, but look for a pattern and for more
Mhm.
than one of those things happening.
Yeah, and if you
Um,
see that pattern, like yell and scream. You know,
mm,
if you see that pattern, do not wait for your school to come to you because they're not going to.
okay, actually, can you talk about that more? Because okay, I actually saw something on the internet the other day that was like, I am a teacher and I wasn't allowed to tell parents that I thought their child was dyslexic or ADHD. And on the one hand, I'm like, well, yeah, because you aren't a diagnostician. But on the
Right.
other hand, but I think that teacher was lost possibly in the wording because when I was doing teacher training, I would say you aren't a diagnostician. You aren't, if you aren't a dyslexia specialist, or if you aren't a psychologist that can diagnosis, you actually don't know. You can just recognize patterns. So what you can do is say to the parent, I've noticed this happening a lot. This might be something that you want to keep an eye on. This is when I've noticed it. Is this what you're seeing? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that perhaps where that teacher was coming from was a place that I've been in, where when I've been in big school districts, the special ed team would come to us. And I would have my 27 first graders in California, or 30, and they would say, you can refer one child this year. And the reason was there were not enough hours in their day to complete all the assessments. And they were trying to triage and say, who are the absolute most severely affected children that we can assess and get help. So I have been not told that I can't say it, but I've been told I can't refer. So
Mhm.
it could be from there. Um, I think you really do want to be careful about telling a parent. You certainly are not going to tell a parent your child is dyslexic. I don't think
Right.
there's anything wrong with saying, I see some signs here that sometimes indicate dyslexia. I don't think
Great.
there's
That is such a
anything
great
wrong with
line.
that. Yeah,
That's, wait, say that again. That's such a good line for
I see
teachers.
some signs that might indicate dyslexia because you've got some and might in there.
Yeah,
Right?
some and might.
Double
Well,
disclaimer, because you don't know.
yeah, and while teachers are amazing and like superheroes, we aren't in a general teaching degree, you aren't a diagnostician.
No,
And
no, right. And then I also know when the teacher said that she wasn't allowed to say dyslexia. Okay, this is embarrassing. Okay. I
okay.
taught in public school for 25 years in Los Angeles. And they told me, the special ed team, who I'm dear friends with now, and have
Yeah.
like dyslexia didn't exist. It's an old-fashioned word. Now we know it's auditory processing or visual processing. They
Oh,
did not
wow.
believe in dyslexia.
What?
2011 is when I left there, okay? So in some ways they were just putting a different label on it, but there was no assessing phonological awareness skills, it wasn't a thing. So in a way, kids would get identified with something, some specific learning disability, and they might be taught a really good phonics program and learn to read, but they would and then they would, if they didn't say it didn't exist, they would say it's a medical diagnosis, so schools can't diagnose dyslexia, which is not true. No doctor will diagnose, no MD will diagnose dyslexia. It's not a
Yeah.
medical diagnosis.
Right.
So that's why the Say Dyslexia campaign was so important.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
That
crazy.
actually that is crazy. That actually brings up another question. How do you go about getting an actual diagnosis?
So there's a few really important things to know. If your child is in public school or homeschooled, they fall under the federal IDEA law. And that law says that schools are obligated to find children who need extra help. That law's interpretations of the law by the education department say you cannot require that a child completes intervention first. You
Okay.
cannot require that a child be a certain age first. So when a school district says, oh, it's our policy, we don't assess children till third grade, that's not legal. The school may
Okay.
not even know that because they've been saying it so long. It's just like an administrator story, you know?
Wow.
So really, like, they don't think they're lying to you, probably. They just don't know. So keep that in mind first, is that when they say, we can't do that, they probably can. Um, if you want to get your child diagnosed, you want to write kind of a compelling email and say, this is why I'm concerned about my child. His dad is dyslexic. His brother is dyslexic. He didn't learn to talk until he was 2. Pull up all those report cards and say, oh, Ms. So-and-so said in first grade that he was achieving below his expected potential. And even though we read to him every day and he has this incredible oral vocabulary, his grades are here. So you want to build a case. Now, they legally, all you should have to do is say, I request that my child be assessed for special education services, but that's not the world we live in. So
Mhm.
you want to just explain, and it doesn't have to be super formal, just explain why you think your child needs to be assessed. And it's really helpful if you can put their own words back, right? If you have an email from the teacher saying you really need to work with your child more because they're not doing okay, but then you send it to, usually you want to send it to a couple of people, like the teacher and the principal, or the teacher and the head of special ed. I like to do it in email because then there's a record.
I always like to give the record.
And you want to say, I look forward to your response within, and it depends on the state, but usually it's like 15 business days, because that kind of lets them know that, oh, she knows there's a timeline, right?
Yes, Cher.
Mhm. And then you got to follow up, right? After those 15 days, you're like, I
Squeaky wheel.
requested this and now I am waiting to sign the assessment plan, because a school, if they're going to deny your request, they have to put it in writing and tell you why. They can't just ignore you. Now, will they ignore you? Maybe. You might have to get an advocate or just go in there over and over and over again. But technically it should be enough to have a child who needs an assessment and ask for one.
Yeah, you don't really think that you would have to be like, for someone that's listening to this. I mean, parents who have had to do this will be like nodding their head, I'm sure, listening to
Yeah,
this, but you don't
yeah.
really think that you would have to fight so hard to get your child what they need, but unfortunately you do.
It's really sad. And I'm also an advocate, but I don't work as an advocate because those meetings made me sick when I was a teacher. And I was like, why do I want to go back and do that again?
I
It's so
know.
frustrating. But you know what? Once you're that mama, you're like, what do I have to do to make this work for my child?
Yes, and you like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Oh
So
gosh, I was talking to two parents today actually who are like, we're leaving our school because after years and years, like they're just not giving us what we need. And unfortunately, now we have to go to a different school. Like they like
yeah,
it's so hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard and it's really not fair.
Yeah. Um, what do you think about gosh, what was I just going to ask you? Um, oh, I would say, what do you think about teachers that aren't really interested in switching over to science of reading curriculum? Like what advice? Do you have any advice that like people, I get a lot of teachers being like, I want to, but none of the other teachers at my school do, or like what?
At some point, your results are going to speak louder than your words. So if you
Mm,
have the opportunity to start implementing whatever practices you can, and you can say without saying, ha ha, I was right and you were wrong, but if you can say, hey, I'm really having a lot of success with X, Y, and Z, because most teachers do genuinely want the best for their students. So I think that showing them the results that you get is the most powerful thing you can do. How much you can change what you do varies on a lot of things. Do you have tenure, right?
yeah.
Like, can you close your door and do some things? So there's a lot, there are a lot of variables there because you have to keep yourself safe first. But getting good results, I think, is the best advertisement. And also, I think that if you cannot just close your door and do different things, I think that rather than trying to preach this whole new religion, it's
Mm,
helpful sometimes to talk about this one little strategy, right? Like, oh,
yeah.
I started teaching sight words this other way, and it seems like it's really working well for my kids, right? If you can get
Mm.
them to buy into a few really effective strategies, maybe then they'll begin to be more open to the whole, like, guess what? I tricked you. This
I
is
know. I was just gonna say, there we go, being trickery, women with trickery
I
again.
hate it. I hate it.
But it
But
works.
I don't know.
It's
Yeah,
kind of like with
I know.
kids, like, oh, I just learned about this. Do you want to try it? Like you gotta, I always say to do that. Like, I just learned, like say it like that. Like, I just learned this. I'm gonna try it. Do you want to try it with me?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I really hate that that's the way I think now, right? About like
Same.
going with my colleagues, but I don't know. It's two different battles, right? And the
It
battle that
is.
we're working on in this case is the battle for kids' entire financial futures, you know?
Yes. Okay, so then there's that one other thing I want to talk about. So we know dyslexia is not something you outgrow, it's a lifelong condition, but we can give strategies. We know dyslexia doesn't only affect reading, there's a lot of other parts of the life that it affects. And we know it's not about just reversing letters. And in fact, it's not even that rare. But there's one other myth that I think people have about dyslexia, and that is one, that it's a sign of laziness or even
Oh,
not being as intelligent.
that's heartbreaking. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's absolutely not true. And I think that's one reason some people are resistant to having their child assessed is they feel like this is going to mean my child's not smart. That is absolutely not true. Dyslexia can occur in someone with of any intelligence, but it absolutely does not mean your child isn't smart. I think I can say this without giving it away, but the child I was talking about that I'm working on morphology with is quite dyslexic. She's also got the highest IQ I've ever seen. Like literally in the testing, like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
her parents took her to NASA when she was little and she started writing equations on the board. The
Yes.
scientists were like, oh my goodness, you need to grow up and come work here, like you
Yeah.
can be brilliant and be dyslexic, or you can be average and be dyslexic, but it 100% does not mean your child is not smart.
Yeah.
And parents need to get over that attitude because their kids will pick up on it. And
Uh-huh.
we know that anxiety and depression are comorbid conditions with dyslexia. Even kids who aren't dyslexic but are just struggling to read, I can't remember the statistic, but when they studied how many struggling readers in first grade have anxiety, it was very significant. So it's really important for the adults in these children's lives to not only understand that it's not about intelligence, but to go out of their way to
Mhm.
reinforce for their child how smart they are, how good they are at solving problems, what an amazing vocabulary they have. Like, you have to really go the extra mile to remind your child of how amazing they are if they're dyslexic, because they're fighting an uphill battle. And we want to believe that kids don't know, like, oh, you're in the red group and you're in the blue group.
Oh gosh.
Kids know who can read in the class and who can't. They know.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we have to protect them. We have to protect their self-esteem. It's very fragile. So, yeah, no,
Yeah.
your brilliant child can absolutely be dyslexic, and they will still grow up to do anything within their potential if you make sure that they get the intervention that they need.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So people that might be listening with little kids, sometimes reading levels get broken down. And so kids that are like around this level, which is just kind of BS because like you can't really group kids like that. I prefer personally to group kids, not like by their reading level, but like by developmental spelling level, so that we would do
Yes.
word study breakdown. And so I would analyze their writing samples. In
Yeah.
fact, sometimes I will like still do that with like kids from all over the world, just be like, what are some first graders in America and some in Turkey just I kind of my own
Yeah.
geeking out. But what are your thoughts on reading levels and group breakdown like that?
Yeah, I think that when I have to group a class, it's been a while, but when I have to group a class, I really think about flexible grouping according to whatever skill we're working on. And you're right that you can very often see that in the spelling. So I'm going to look and see in my first grade or my kindergarten, okay, let's look at their writing, let's look at their reading, who needs to work on short O? And I'm going to group those kids for some lessons on short O, and then probably have completely different groups the next week. I think the thing you want to ask your teacher, and I got to say, I've had some teachers get really unhappy with this because a lot of them don't have the materials to teach this way, but you don't want to know your child is at a level L. You want to know what skills your child has. So with your kindergartner, you want to know, does my child know all of the letter sounds? Does my child know how to read words with consonant, vowel, consonant? Does my child know how to read words with digraphs? Does my child know how to read words with magic E, right? You really
Mm-hmm.
want to know what skills your child is working on in reading. You also want to know like what they can comprehend and things like that. But no, I think that we were talking about not wanting to draw attention to like, oh, here's the like bluebird group over here,
Yeah.
right?
The soaring eagles and the tiny
Crawling
crows.
worms, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the worms. The slow snails.
Yeah, but if you're doing lessons that focus on comprehension, then they can all be together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, so those alphabet levels are just trash. And what I want people to know instead is what skills is their child working on right now.
I love
I
it.
want to
Do you
say though
have
that if you've gone the road of asking for your child to be assessed for a learning disability, you want to make sure they include a phonemic awareness test, because often you'll end up at that IEP meeting and there will be nothing there that tested phonemic awareness. And the most common test for that is called the C-top. So that's the test that the ed psych needs to do
okay.
if you want to make sure that your child gets an adequate assessment if they're getting assessed for special ed services.
Amazing. There was one other thing before I ask you our last question. There's one other thing that I forgot to name. Well, I think we kind of did talk about forgetting names, but rapid automaticity
Oh, yeah.
um, is, I feel like, such a good little not assessment, but informal assessment that
I
parents or
love it.
teachers could do. Could you talk a little bit about
Yes.
that?
Yeah, you know how there's always those kids in your kindergarten who they know the colors, they know the colors. But if you sit down with objects and say, what color is this? And a normal, typically developing child will go red, blue, green. But some kids will need a few seconds before they say red. And that has to do with how quickly they're able to retrieve the information. So rapid automatic naming, RAN, can be a problem for some kids with dyslexia. And if a child has both the phonemic awareness issue and the rapid naming issue, we call that double deficit dyslexia, which makes it a little bit harder to remediate. But yes, I agree that if you see a child and they have difficulty with that kind of retrieval, it's a good issue to pay attention to. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, like that. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So my last question I like to ask, this is a newer question I'm asking on the podcast, is if you could leave behind one legacy, like one thing you want to change in the education system, what would it be? And I have to say, I didn't give you this question ahead. So,
Oh my gosh. Just one.
well, okay, fine. You can pick two.
Okay, two. Okay. I want every child to continue to be immersed in good literature. One thing that is breaking my heart in primary grades is teachers who are being forced to use whatever curriculum and say they don't have time to read to their kids. A lot of them, I don't know if you're seeing it where you are, but there's a lot of teachers here who are like, oh yeah, we'll read a book and then after every sentence we'll stop and talk about comprehension. I'm like, no. I mean, you tell the child, bring me your favorite book and we're just going to read it. We're not even going to talk about it at all. If the bell rings, we're going to go, hey, that was awesome, right?
Oh, yes.
Like morning circle, before recess, after recess, before lunch, after lunch, right?
That makes me think of my third grade teacher. She always read to us Mrs. Pigglewiggle. And
Oh,
it's so good. And I remember that was my favorite year in school. And I don't remember anything about comprehension. And I also like wasn't a great reader, but I remember like we would, if we got our stuff packed up quick enough, she would say, okay, we can read 2 pages. And we always did. It was the best.
and I know a lot of researchers are even saying now, it's like, you don't have time for that, wasted minutes. And
What?
I'm like, no, I'm not kidding. Like, that's not the best use of your instructional time. And I'm thinking, but we're forming a community here. So like back off. So
Yeah,
first
that
I would say, like, read to your kids, read to your kids, read to your kids. And then the second would have to be just that we get the best possible instruction in reading based on the science that we have at the time into every single classroom. There would still be some children that need extra help, but it would be such a smaller gap because dyslexic kids, if they're taught well, might not ever need extra help. So yeah, I just want kids to get great reading instruction. That would be amazing.
Yeah, and that's kind of the first part that you said about don't forget to keep reading aloud to kids. I feel like parents and teachers think like,
Yeah.
oh, now we switch to them reading to me. It's like, no, don't ever stop reading because of the attachments that you're forming, because of the community you're building in your classroom, but also like there is no substitute for the vocabulary you're building on, like for those second graders that are reading, that are being read to. They can't, their vocabulary isn't going to be growing in their decodable text as much.
Right.
And just keep reading those books to them, because it's not like, okay, now you read to me. And I always say that anytime people are like, oh, well, either kids need to enjoy it or we need to do direct instruction. It's like, no, find time to read aloud and do direct instruction. All of this is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And you are on your way. We are doing it. I feel like, I mean, we're seeing change happening in the reading.
Yeah.
So, oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for being here. And any last parting wisdom you need to give to the world?
Just fight for your kids, you know? Like if you think your kid needs more, like I said, your school's not going to come to you. Fight for your kids, fight for your kids, fight for your kids.
Yes, I love it. Oh my gosh, you're amazing.
Oh, so are you. This is so fun.
I know.